improvisation is in the left hand walking bass, right hand improvisation. Hi, my name is Dave Frank. I was a professor of piano at Berklee College of Music for 17 years. And I now live in New York City and run a school called the Dave Frank School of Jazz. And what I've devoted my lifetime to is the process of improvisation and how to teach that. So improvisation is, the basic concept of improvisation is that it reverses the experience of music making that's traditionally taught. In the traditional style of music, the source of the music is outside of you. And that ultimately is the mind of the composer, or the mind of Billy Joel, somebody said, or somebody. So the source of music is outside, and what you do as the pianist is you bring the music in, and then you bring it out again. So the source is out here, and we bring it in, and we study it, and we practice it, and then we bring it out again. And that's the enjoyment of that, and that's a beautiful thing. When you're improvising, you're doing the exact opposite of that. The source of the music is within you. And what you are doing as an improviser is you're bringing the music out. So the whole challenge of improvisation is, how do you teach the student where to find the music that's within them? And how do you teach them how to begin bringing it out? There is a basic principle to improvisation that I wanted to share with you this morning. So there's one basic concept of improvisation that I think you'll find very interesting, and you may find ways to incorporate this into your classical teaching or whatever kind of teaching you do. Improvisation is a recipe. There's different aspects to it. There's the technical aspect. Improvisation, we have to play what we're hearing at the moment of hearing it. So when you hear Oscar Peterson or somebody playing jazz, what you as the audience are hearing is the same thing that he's hearing at the same moment that he's hearing it. Okay, so no one has ever heard this music before, including Oscar. And Oscar's on stage, and he's playing something that has never been played. And he is capable of hearing it, digesting it, and executing it in the moment. And so everyone is hearing the music for the first time. And what you hear Oscar play, no one will ever play again, and Oscar will never play again. So there are different aspects that go into the ability to improvise. There's a technical aspect. So when I teach improvisation to my students, I always include something I call a jazz Hanon, which is a Hanon exercise adapted for jazz. Then there's a theoretical aspect to improvisation, which is basically the knowledge of scales and chords and progressions and how it all works together. And then there's an ear training aspect to improvisation, which is the capacity to hear music in your head in the moment, and then the fingers will transmit that music that you play. But there's one basic principle of it I want to share with you that I think you'll enjoy. This is like the E equals MC squared of improvisation. It's called flow, phrase, breathe. Flow, phrase, breathe. 3 parts. So when we're talking about improvisation, generally, for piano students or piano players, there's one of the great things about improv is that there's so many styles. So you can hear everybody from Earl Hines to Art Tatum to Keith Jarrett to my teacher Lenny Tristano. And you hear the greatness and the variety of jazz and improvisation, how it developed over the past century, and now is continuing to develop. The basic style of playing would be to do chords in the left hand and then improvisation in the right hand. There are different ways to do it. One thing I just did for you was the bass line, the walking bass line in the left hand. So that simulates a bass player. But if we were just improvising, for example, on a blues, when you start with students, you usually start with chords in the left hand and improvisation in the right hand. Okay? So that would sound something like this. So if we just did a simple blues improvisation, the chords in the left hand would be playing interesting voicings. And the right hand would be improvising over those chord changes. Now, when you're improvising, there's generally one or more different chord scales that you are using to create your improvisations. So the great improviser has a lot of theoretical knowledge behind what they're doing. So the theoretical knowledge and the concepts of improvisation guide the improviser. So when you see somebody improvising, which seems, pretty unbelievable that someone can create music on the spot, there's a lot of years of study, obviously, and there's a lot that goes into that. One aspect is the harmony. So in this case, we'll have voicings in the left hand. This is just obviously a very quick run through, but I think you'll get something out of it. So the chords in the left hand have a set progression. The chords in the left hand are like a carousel, right? So you have all the horses fixed and they're going around in a fixed order. In this case, it's a blues. So it's just a question of 3 chords, C7, F7, and we have some nice voicings for these. C7, F7. This is what we call a 12-bar blues progression. It's one of the simplest things to teach people for improvisation. Great for students. And it's hard to sound bad when you do this, which is a great added benefit when you're teaching somebody. Now, in the right hand, I'm thinking of a basic scale that goes with this progression. This is part of studying improvisation. We want to know the chord progressions, the basic, common 2-5-1 progressions, blues progressions, and then there are corresponding scales that fit over these progressions like pants and a shirt. This is part of the knowledge going in. What you do when you sit down to improvise is we call flow, phrase, breathe. There are 3 parts. The first part is flow. When we're talking about flow, we're generally talking about the basic backbone of jazz and improvisation, which is the swing eighth flow. This is the swing eighth flow is the key to improvisation. And the swing eighth flow goes like this. Sometimes we can say New York, New York, New York, New York, New York, New York, New York. 2, 3, 4. New York, New York, New York. This is called the swing eighth flow. The rhythm of the swing eighth flow is the foundation of about 80% of all the great jazz improvisation you'll hear. So when you put on a record by Dave Brubeck or Oscar Peterson and you listen to what he's doing in the right hand, or she, you'll hear a preponderance of this swing eighth line. This is the music of jazz and improvisation comes in on the rhythm of the swing eighth line. So the first thing to do when you're improvising is to know the chords. So we're going to focus on basic improvisation. The student will play chords in the left hand and will improvise in the right hand. In the right hand there will be some knowledge of basic chord scale or scales. If I had a little more time I could write this out for you, but it's something that you can study.
Dave, is that in your book by any chance?
Yes, a ton of this stuff is in the books, yeah. So the first thing we want to do when we improvise, we want to know our chord progression. So if I was improvising on a tune, so let's say I was improvising on There'll Never Be Another You. See, we have a chord progression in the left hand, and that's the chord progression of the tune. And that is like the merry-go-round, it's fixed. The chords don't change. So the first thing you want the student to do is to play some nice voicings against the chord progression so the left hand sounds good. And there's a whole science of this. It's all in these books if you're interested. And there are very standard but great jazz voicings for the left hand typically, and we do that in the left while we improvise in the right. The second thing would be to know the chord scales that apply to the different parts of the tune. So the first eight beats of this tune get an E flat major scale is the basic scale I've used to improvise over an E flat major 7. Sounds right. Then we go to a C harmonic minor. What we do is called chord mapping. Chord mapping is where you take a standard tune or blues and you isolate the progression. So one of the really interesting things to know about improvisation is that, like a computer language, it looks really super complicated, but it's really just a combination of ones and zeros. So for jazz tunes, standard tunes, Great American Songbook, what's complicated is that you have this whole 32-bar structure to improvise on. Improvising over standards is the hardest thing to do. There are a lot of other things like blues and modal vamps and things like that are easier. But when you take a standard tune, I just want to give you insight into the thinking process. It's a step-by-step process that leads to improvisation. We first look at the chords, and we try to memorize or read the chord sequence of whatever it is that we're improvising. Secondly, we study or find out, or somebody tells us, what the chord scales are that correspond to the chords that we're improvising on. So we're not flying around blind when we're improvising. We do have a lot behind it, a lot of theoretical knowledge. If I'm on an E flat major 7 at the beginning of Another You, I know that the E flat major scale is going to work. Now there's an infinite number of phrases you can create just with that one chord and that one scale. Is this clear? So we have chords first, then chord scales. Each one of these is a subject, but I just want to show you how it's all put together. Then we have the magic of the flow, phrase, breathe. So the first thing you concentrate on when you're improvising is this eighth note flow. And so I feel that before I'm going to play. That's the kind of flow of jazz. That's the flow of improvisation. You can do it against chords. You can do it against the bass line. It's the same swing eighth flow. So you want to feel this swing eighth flow. Once we get into the swing eighth flow, we know our chords, we know our chord scales, and then we generate the swing eighth flow. And there are 3 different lengths of phrases that you can use when you improvise. Now this goes for all kinds of music. One of the interesting things about improvisation is that every style of improvisation is different. So if you're improvising over rock, that's one thing. If you're improvising over blues, that's another thing. If you're improvising over take the A-Train jazz, that's another thing. If you're playing on funk, that's another thing. In world music is another thing. The elements of music change. So if I'm improvising on rock, it will be typically a triadic progression with pentatonic scales as the chord scales. That's a broad generalization. If I'm improvising on blues, it's the basic 1-4-5 blues chord sequence with the blues scale in the right hand. If I'm improvising on jazz, the chords and the scales shift more quickly. This is what makes jazz improvisation the hardest, because I have to be aware, now I'm in E flat, now I'm in C minor harmonic, now I'm in A flat, so on. You do study this like a golfer when he's shooting the championship putt. He doesn't just go up and grab the club and go like that. He's looking at it, he tests it. There's something behind that shot. What's behind the shot is the years of learning and the experience. In improvisation, what's behind the improvisation is the theoretical knowledge and the concepts. This is what we do when we teach improvisation with students. We give them the technical, theoretical, and concepts of improvisation that allow them to find and to create the music that is within them. And the music that is within them will be different than the music that is within them. That's the interesting part. So, flow, eighth note flow. Three lengths: short, medium, long. A short phrase is generally 1 to 2 measures of swing eighth continuous flow. So when you hear Oscar Peterson, you may hear commonly short phrases. That would sound like this. That's short phrases, mostly swing eighth notes. There, this is the beginning, this is the ending, but the backbone of all jazz improvisation is a swing eighth flow. So I can create a short phrase with it. That's typically 1 to 2 measures. I can create a longer phrase, a medium length phrase, which is 2 to 4 measures. Everyone is a complete melody, and I'm hearing it in my head at the same time you're hearing it on the piano. I can prove it. teaching improvisation exclusively for 45 years or more is that every musician can do this. It is a natural human ability. We haven't been taught how to do it typically. But I have never met a musician that can't improvise. It's natural. You have to access these concepts and principles. And then it will happen for everybody all the time. It's never fails. Okay, so the last kind of eighth note phrase is 4 measures or more. That's a long eighth note phrase, okay? These are our 3 basic choices. So we have our chords, we have our scales, and then we get into flow, phrase, breathe. Flow is either a short line, a medium line, or a long line. A long line, again, what I'm doing is using the same 3 chords in the left hand and using basically a blues scale, 1 scale which I know ahead of time, although that, there's room there. But still, we can go a long way with just 3 chords and 1 scale. And then I apply the flow, phrase, breathe, and the music starts to come out like a jukebox. You don't even have to do anything. It's just there. Obviously, it takes experience and a teacher. But the interesting part of improvisation is that it's natural human ability. It's like the birds flying around. They're just improvising. That's what happens. We improvise speech all day. Improvisation is a natural thing for us. But we do have to kind of learn it step by step, and then you'll see it happen for you. So a long phrase would be like this. So the first thing we do is flow, and we find that eighth note flow, which is really simple to find. You just have to go New York, New York, New York, New York, or sometimes we go slice of pizza, slice of pizza, slice of pizza. Slice of pizza is you grouping the eighth notes into groups of 4, and there's a slight accent on the first of the 4. This is the natural basic jazz flow. Slice of pizza, slice of pizza. I actually have students say that. And I'm celiac, so I can't have pizza, so probably that's why I'm doing this. But you have these students going, slice of pizza, slice of pizza. The mnemonic device helps to access the source of the music with it. So this is something you can try with your students here. If you want to try improvisation, feel the eighth note flow, New York, New York, New York, and then put it in groups of 4 with a little accent on the first of the 4. See how natural it feels? This is improvised. Now, usually, all right, when we end the phrase, we usually hold the last note. Not always, but usually. A lot of times when people improvise, they just kind of throw the last note away, but we want to hold that last note, typically. And when we hold the note, we want to have a certain definite feeling, which is we want to feel that we have just created a complete musical sentence. This is improvising. We first flow. That flow is like you put your canoe in the water, and you don't have to necessarily paddle too much. The stream is going to move you. So once we connect with the swing eighth flow, the music is going to start to move. It's going to start to come. It's going to start to happen. You'll be amazed. Then we have to end it somewhere. It doesn't go flowing on from here forever. It has to end. Either going to be a short phrase, medium phrase, long phrase. When we end the phrase, we always want to feel, I have just created a complete musical sentence. Okay? Let me demonstrate this so you can feel it. This is something that you feel, that you can feel. You learn to feel. So this is not a complete musical sentence. That's whatever it is. This is a complete musical sentence. Feels right. It's a sentence, just like you're learning English. I'm going to the store. I'm holding the last note. It should feel complete. Always complete. Now maybe we can do longer ones. It's still a melody. You're always thinking about creating a melody that becomes a complete sentence. Some are short, some are longer. Feel that? Feel that? Okay. When we end the phrase, we phrase, flow, phrase, and then breathe. Breathe means that you put a picture, you put a frame around the picture. So when you create this complete melody, you want to listen to the last note of the phrase and let the ringing of the phrase tell you when to start the next phrase. This is natural process. Watch. That felt complete. Now I'm holding and I listen. I don't have to try to do anything. I just listen to that ringing note. And the ringing note will tell me immediately when I should start the next phrase. Sometimes I'll hold it for a beat. Sometimes I'll hold it for a measure. The music tells me how to do this. If you're tuned into the concept, the music will do it for you. Now, we breathe, and we breathe as long as that last note wants to ring. And then we go on to the next phrase. So the basic process of improv is flow, phrase, breathe. If it's blues, maybe I'll try with the bass line on the blues, okay? You'll hear a bass line in the left hand, but the right hand is still doing this basic kind of process. This kind of process, in the breathing part, you have a little person in your head who we call the improv person. He's gender neutral. It could be an improv anything. But the improvising person in your head knows the answer to all the puzzles of improvisation. You just have to program this little person and say, look, find the flow, it has to end, listen to the ring, and you'll know when to start the next one. So that's all I'm doing when I'm playing, is I'm just letting this little guy function. So now, I'll get a signal sometimes it should be a long phrase or a short phrase. The next one. Usually we start with a short phrase, just kind of a way to kind of start the thing off. It's like, if you meet somebody for the first time, you probably wouldn't tell them the whole history of your life without taking a record, you know. Usually start kind of short. Hi, Joe. Nice to see you. Right? Now, I'm listening. Thank you very much.
Question or two?
This presentation itself is flow, phrase, breathe. So,
Hi, I'm very structural in my thinking. Because there's a tremendous amount of theory that goes into all of this. I mean, what you called an F7 was an abbreviated 13th chord, and what you call the C9 had the third. There's a whole lingo to these left-hand chordal harmonies and things like that. How much do you need to explain in order to integrate it with the blues scales that are required? Do you teach by rote and just have them copy you, or do your students have a thorough understanding of what they're playing in chords?
this book is called JOY of Improv.
Right.
It is 2 volumes. There's a technical jazz exercise called the jazz Hammond, which isolates on the technique of the student. So I have the student doing Hammond with the swing feet and faster and faster to different keys. Then we study voicing charts. Voicing charts here is maybe, what do we have here? Maybe 30 different possibilities for a C major seven. And we do those in all keys. Yeah. And so this is before the light comes on in your jam. Okay? So I present to the students lists of voicings for different qualities, which they study first. And then we study how to put them together. So they begin to develop their own personal vocabulary of voicing. But a good way to do it, and my teacher Lenny did it this way too, is to present the student with all kinds of different possibilities. A C7 could be this, it 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 could be this. When Lenny gave me the list of dominant chords, so this was different possibilities for voicing a dominant chord in the left hand. There were over 100 in every key. So the whole lesson, he was just sitting there going 3, 5, 7, 9, 3, 5, 7, 11. So you're absolutely right that you need this theoretical foundation in order to what we call turn it loose. But that's what you give to the student right off the bat is here's technique, here's a ton of voicings, let me show you how to use them, let's play some tunes using them, and then these concepts of flow, phrase, breathe, they can start to.
But they can follow the book and give this to their students.
This is a foundation.
Right.
Foundation that includes technique and theory and ear training and lots of jazz tunes and blues.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
This was so fabulous.
Great.
Just a little from what you were talking about with, everybody has
Yes.
this music inside of them.
Right.
I often take 4-year-olds and often have a tag-on lesson with an older kid, and I do a lot of pentatonic stuff that I'm laying down something, that's a repeating thing. And I have this one 4-year-old that if you closed your eyes, you would have thought she was a jazz great. And I know that her parents.
She may have been.
Right, and that's true. But I know her parents are not exactly exposing her to this. I was like, oh my gosh, where is this coming from? So
Beautiful.
thank you so much.
That really does happen.
Yeah, and just even if you don't consider yourself a jazz pianist, try some of these things even with your younger kids. I'll do a blues where I'll play the chords and I'll have them do a one-note solo.
Right, exactly.
Just to get a rhythmical
Exactly.
feel of things.
Right.
And then they love, I call it the black note improv, because they
Great.
just love it. It's so easy for very young kids to just, I'm not going to play any white notes, I'm just playing all
Right.
black. And there's no real resolution, but they just can go on and
Right.
on.
Right.
So, but now you're helping me to see where I could take this
Good.
to older kids and
Sure.
to adults, and even for my own playing, I want to get there.
When you work with beginners or kids in improvisation, what you want to do is you want to limit the possibilities and give them some concepts that they can use to create their own music. So as you said, you can take one note or 3 notes. You as a teacher can play a blues progression and just say, okay, here's 3 notes. Now I want you to think of an 8th note rhythm and just play what you feel. So 3 notes. And so if you give them a limited number of possibilities and give them some guiding concepts, that's the thing where the kids will just, boom, they'll
And
just come up.
even if you're like more classically trained yourself to want to do it, that's a good way to get into it.
Yeah.
And you don't have to be the best
Absolutely.
jazz pianist in the
Definitely not.
world to do this, to expose your kids to be able to improvise. Because then when they're taking music that's already written by someone else, you know, they'll play it more musically
Right.
by incorporating this.
It's joyful to do it, and it's free. I want to mention that what I've dedicated myself to the last 10 years is developing an archive of improv master classes. And you can find these if you want. They're all free, and they're located at website davefrankjazz.com. davefrankjazz.com. 51 classes at this moment, with more coming. Some are about players, like here's Errol Garner's style. Some are about concepts. Here's how you do a walking bass line. And they're all way too long, and they're all free. And you can watch them in your creepy pajamas if you want. And so I invite you just to come and learn and have fun.